full moon tonight? It will be an adventure. Coming up later in the program, a look at where we are and where we're going. Not a superficial look, but a real examination. Are we moving from one world to another? Are the dimensions changing? What kind of transition is it? How's it going to happen? And perhaps more importantly, what does it all mean? Are the secrets from the past that could help us through this turmoil? Are there those secrets, or are there those secrets that are in the past and that means they're lost? With us will be Bob Frissell, who will help sort out the confusion of the earth and social changes around us. His book, Something in This Book is True, the official companion to Nothing in This Book is True, but it is exactly how things are. Sound confusing? Yeah, so's life. Let's take a look at what's going on around us. And boy, there are some strange things going on around us. First of all, just in terms of weather, showers and thunderstorms from Texas to New England all day today with all that I got from Bob Frissell. Of course, his books, and I love the titles of them. Something in This Book is True, the official companion to Nothing in This Book is True, but it's exactly how things are. The author's name is Bob Frissell, and he writes about a variety of things that kind of point at two Chinese proverbs. One that says, if we don't change our direction, we're likely to end up where we're headed. And the other one says that crisis and opportunity sit side by side. And then I'll add to that one that I like. It's a Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. I think that's where we are. Bob Frissell, thanks for being on Coast.
Well, thank you for having me, Barbara. Good evening.
Good evening. What do you think about that Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times?
Yeah, that's in the intro of my third book.
I love that. I always remembered that one because we are in interesting times in a whole variety of levels. Everything from a caller I had the first hour was asking about, what do you think about the end times? What do you think about an economic recession? What do you think about war? All of those possibilities are out there, aren't they?
They sure are, and they all appear to be coming to a head right about now.
What do you think's causing it?
Well, it's a good question, and when you take a look, and I take a survey every time I get in front of a group of people, asking the same questions, the first one always draws a laugh. Is the question being, are these normal times? And
what's normal, Bob?
Yeah, right. What is normal? For sure, not these.
No.
And I ask a couple other questions too, Barbara, and I get, maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but I do get virtually unanimous response on the following questions. One being that does time seem normal to you? And the unanimous answer is that time seems to be speeding up, at least for everybody I talk to. Another question I ask is it easier or more difficult, or is it about the same for you to maintain emotional stability? Well, that one's a pretty obvious no in just about every case. And then the next one is short-term memory. Like if you're getting up from the living room to walk into the kitchen, and when you get to the kitchen, you cannot remember why you're in the kitchen.
I thought those were senior moments, Bob.
I thought it was just me.
I'm glad to hear it's not just me.
There's two of us, huh? Good.
But I agree with you, actually, on all of that. But quite frankly, I sort of attributed it to the fact that we're all getting older every year. And when I was a kid, summer vacation just lasted forever. It just went on and on and on, and days were long and wonderful, and no matter what you were doing, even if you were doing chores around the house, it didn't matter. It just seemed to take forever to get through. And now, I commented to one of my coworkers this afternoon that I saw a sign on a store window this morning that said end of summer sale. And I thought, wait a minute, I didn't even go swimming this summer. What happened to summer? It goes so fast.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of young people in my workshops too, and they're saying the same thing.
What do you think is causing it?
Well, that's an interesting question for sure. And in general, the question is what is going on? I mean, we have to add a few more riddles to the mix here too, Barbara. We talk about, just look at the UFO phenomenon, the crop circles, the ETs, what's going on with Earth change prophecies, the Bible code, conspiracy theories, just on and on and on. Another interesting way of looking at what's going on is the acceleration of the information that we've been gathering. And what I mean by that is that if you look at when our culture first came out around 3800 to 4000 BC in Sumeria, from that point until about 1950, we as a civilization gathered a certain amount of information. But from 1950 to about 1970, we doubled that. And so you're talking in the space of about 20 years, just doubling what took almost 6,000 years to gather in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been doubling every 10 years or less than that right now, to the point to where it's off the scale. So it's just another indication that something is going on. The other question that's closely related to that is, why is it happening now? I mean, why? What is it about this time that's significant or different or important? Obviously, if you look at history books, everything has happened in the past, or if you're a futurist, you would think that it's going to happen 10,000 years from now. But it's not. It's happening now. So I think that we really have to lump these two questions together to begin to get an idea of what might be going on. So
couldn't you, if I were to play devil's advocate with you, that we had the technological developments over the last 100 years?
Yes.
I mean, if you take someone who is, and there are more people today in this country who are 100 years old, but you go back 100 years, look at the changes that they've seen in their lives. My father-in-law died at 98, and I thought back to his life. I remember talking to my mother-in-law's mother, who died at a number of years ago, but she was close to 100 years old when she died, and she told us about crossing the desert, of southern Arizona into California on the old plank roads over the desert, when they just put wood down so the wagons wouldn't sink into the sand. And today I can get in my car in air-conditioned comfort with a CD playing, and whatever, and drive through and never even feel fresh air on me. I mean, it's just astonishing.
Right. No question about it. The technological revolution is just another huge factor to add to the mix.
But why does it have to be something mysterious about it? Why can't it just be the normal progression of human beings using their intellectual ability and scientific knowledge to learn more about the universe and how things work, so that now we have computers instead of typewriters, and computer calculators instead of adding machines or pencils?
Well, there certainly is validity to your point, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And to that, I would add that there's a great possibility that there's something else going on. And so my question, in order to begin to point to the something else, Barbara, what I would like to do is take a look at two motions regarding our planet that in my opinion, are essential to understanding, to get some sort of a grasp of what you might call a big picture of what's going on. The first motion is similar in a sense to the way the Earth and the Moon are connected, in that they revolve essentially around each other and have a definite influence on each other. We are connected to Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, in a manner that is very similar to our connection to the Moon. And I just point to Sirius because that's, so important in tonight's discussion. But for the moment, there's another motion that I would prefer to zero in on, and that's one that is a 26,000-year cycle called the precession of the equinoxes. We know that there are different motions with regard to our planet. Obviously, there's day and night, 24 hours. There's 365 days, giving us the 4 seasons in the year. But what is not so widely known is that the axis itself, tilted at 23.5 degrees, itself is in a slight wobble. It takes about 72 years for it to change 1 degree, about 2,160 years for it to change the viewpoint of one constellation, and roughly 26,000 years to make one complete cycle. So it was the ancients, particularly the Tibetans and the Hindus, who noticed that there are 2 points on this 26,000-year cycle, 13,000 years apart, where tremendous change on the planet is more likely to happen than not. Well, the last time tremendous change happened on the planet was a little less than 13,000 years ago, so guess where we're sitting right now?
What happened then?
Well, what happened is that there were 2 aspects of the change. The first aspect is the physical nature, and the second aspect is the consciousness or the dimensional nature of things. So when you're talking about physical changes, and by the way, if you look at the prophecies of the Hopi Indians or of Edgar Cayce, or go way back to Nostradamus, or in present times to Gordon Michael Scallion and people like that, and I know he's been on the program, so
that's right.
perhaps the listeners are familiar with what Gordon Michael has to say. They're talking about huge changes. And they're talking about these changes happening right now. If you've seen Scallion's future map of the U.S., dated between 1997 and 2001, it shows Denver as being the new West Coast seaport. And for those of us living in California, the best we can hope for is that we'll be on an island.
That's only 4 months from now.
Yeah, or it's already happened. I don't know, but
well, it hasn't happened. I mean, Denver is not Denver is not on the coast yet.
Yeah.
If they are, then I'm in a lot of trouble in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, I'm even closer to the ocean than you are.
But realistically, are those kinds of predictions based on any type of scientific background, or is it really legend from other peoples like the Native Americans?
Well, to use Edgar Cayce as an example, he was not very often wrong, and allegedly
That's true.
giving a reading back in the 1930s. And he pretty much stopped in the middle of the reading and said, there's something else going on that's perhaps just a little bit more important that you might like to know about. And then he went on to say, did you know that the poles are going to shift in the winter of 1998?
1998?
1998, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
did they?
Well,
at all?
Not that we know of, unless we skated through to a parallel reality, which is something we might...
I mean, were there even any minor changes that might have sneaked past us, but that would fulfill what he was saying?
Yeah, so what this is doing, Barbara, is setting the stage for what I really want to get to and really want to talk about. So Cayce, on the one hand, was right in just about every prophecy he ever made, except for the big one. The winter of 1998, as far as we know, has come and gone, and we're still here. And I'd say that that's good news.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely glad we're here.
Yeah. So, and again, he's not the only one who said this. There's other groups, other people who have said essentially the same thing. And my question is, what are they talking about? It's like you're asking, is there some validity to that? Is it based on scientific evidence, or just what the heck is it that's going on here? So when we come back to these 2 points in this 26,000-year cycle, the precession of the equinoxes, when they're talking about physical changes, they're talking about nothing less than entire continents going up and down. I mean, that is a possibility. And so that would certainly explain Denver becoming a new West Coast seaport.
That's true. If you go back, I mean, and the time frame that you're talking about, would that fit into, for example, Atlantis?
The last time it happened is when Atlantis sank a little bit less than 13,000 years ago. Yes.
And do we know that for a fact?
Well, we don't know it for a scientific fact, and to me that I'd better issue my disclaimer right now, actually. Okay. I put it in my first book, Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are. And partly why I gave that title was...
I love that title, by the way. It's wonderful.
It's worked pretty good. But in addition to having fun with it, it also served as a disclaimer. And really, what I want to be clear about, Barbara, is that I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. Certainly I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. And I'm not coming from a whole lot of scientific evidence. It's more from the level of the higher aspects of us, which we'll get into perhaps in a few minutes. But so the business of the pole shifting, and yes, we can ask the question, was Atlantis for real and all the rest of that? I'm going on the assumption from the information given to me that for sure our culture began a lot more than 6,000 years ago, that in fact we have been around for a little over 200,000 years. And prior to our culture coming out in Sumeria and then allegedly 500 years later in Egypt, if you go back 13,000 years, there was a thriving continent of Atlantis that was around for about 65,000 years And prior to that, the continent the island continent in the Pacific known as Lemuria. So that's where I'm coming from with this. And Atlantis allegedly did sink along with 64 million inhabitants, and that was about 13,000 years ago. So when you're talking about pole shifts, you're talking about 1,000-mile-an-hour winds, you're talking about entire continents going up and down, you're talking about new continents coming up under the ocean, you're talking about major change. And if that's all that was going on, then obviously that would be reason for some concern, but it's not. There's another factor.
Let's just stay with that for a second. Actually, there's nothing we could do about that, is there?
Well, I think that's quite possibly there is. And again, that's in the direction that ultimately we're moving in. Let me just lay a little groundwork here and make the suggestion that you and I, individually and collectively, are creating the reality unerringly. That it's true whether we know it or not, it's true whether we like it or not, it's true whether we accept it or not. And the opportunity is to wake up and create the reality collectively, consciously. So the initial point right here, Barbara, is that according to the Ascended Masters, the higher aspect of us, the degree of severity of the pole shifting is directly related to our consciousness. And in fact, it's very similar to the analogy of birth. If in the delivery room a woman is in fear, then the birth is going to be a reflection of that fear. If, on the other hand, and in fact it's been documented on film in Russia, where women giving birth are not only in pain, they're not only painless, but they're having an orgasm, and it's right on film in the moment of birth. So what's the difference?
I find that hard to believe as a woman who's had children.
Yeah.
That is about the last thing in the world you're thinking of when you're giving birth.
Yeah, yet it's on film. It's real. So my point...
what does that prove, if it's real?
That everything is a function of consciousness.
So that you can will things to happen?
Not will.
Nature?
Not will. But very simply, if we go into fear, we contract, and at that moment we're stuck with what we are at the effect of, our fears and our limitations. On the other hand, as we remain open, i.e. awake, open in consciousness, then we expand our ability to simply be with what previously we would have clamped up in the face of. And I'm suggesting that that can make a difference. That combined with the fact that the Ascended Masters are saying that the consciousness of the planet is directly linked to how gentle or how severe these changes are going to be. And keep in mind that the physical changes that we're talking about is only one of the two aspects of the great changes. The other change has to do with dimensional changes and the change in consciousness itself.
When you say consciousness of the planet, what do you mean?
Individually and collectively, the consciousness of us, the inhabitants.
Meaning what?
Meaning how we think and how we feel and how we act is unerringly creating the reality.
But couldn't somebody say that if that's true, then there is no reality? That we're just willing it to happen or allowing it to happen by not willing it to happen? Let's keep your thought there, because I hear music, and that means we're at the bottom of the hour. When we come back, let's pursue that a little more and then talk about some of the other aspects of this change that we're talking about. My guest is Bob Frissell, talking about some pretty profound issues here. In his book, Nothing in This Book is True. The way it is and the way it may well be. Earth change prophecies are nothing new, ranging from psychic predictions to the prophecies of the ancients through the ages, to biblical predictions, right on to cult predictions of modern times, where they pick a day that the world will end, get ready to die, and nothing happens. Or sometimes they put themselves out of life, but that's another issue entirely. So far, it hasn't ended. The world does continue. We continue to survive, but things are changing on this planet. As we were talking with our guest earlier, whether it just seems that things are going faster and faster, whether there's just too much information, there's too much to do, and there are earth changes. And the problem is we really don't know what they are, where they come from, or what they mean. That's part of the problem. Our guest is Bob Frissell. I understand you correctly that through our consciousness and awareness of what's happening around us, that we can actually influence what those changes will be as far as the physical planet is concerned?
seems to be the case.
I need you to speak up. Get right close to the phone.
Okay, how am I doing now?
That's better.
Okay, good. Yeah, that seems to be the case, Barbara, and according to the Ascended Masters, that in fact is the case. So what they're saying is this, that with regard to consciousness, there's many different worlds here. There's much, much more than just appears on the surface. In other words, much more than just what we can see. And given what we can see is vast. I mean, if you look out to the most distant stars, and if you, using the world's most powerful telescope, if you use the microscope to look into, it's vast. But what evidently is true is that that's just nothing compared to what's really there. What we're talking about is dimensions. There's other worlds, literally other worlds, all right here. They're separated by wavelength and by 90 degrees. And we are in the process of shifting consciousness, literally in the process of moving from one-dimensional aspect of the Earth to another. And this is coming from what you might call the higher aspect of us, the Ascended Masters, and also a level of awareness known as the Melchizedeks. This is what they're saying.
Tell me about the Melchizedeks.
Okay. In order to tell that, Barbara, we need to talk a little bit about dimensions and perhaps just lay a little bit of groundwork here, if that's okay. So when we're talking about dimensions, it's very useful to make an analogy of an octave on a musical keyboard, on a piano. If you look at an octave on a keyboard, what you have, of course, is the 8 white notes, and that gives you the octave we're familiar with. But there's really more than that because of the 5 black notes, and that gives you the chromatic scale, 13 notes, actually 12 notes, the 13th note being the return note for the next octave. And the reason one note sounds different from another is that they're separated by wavelength. And so if you make that comparison to dimensional worlds, it actually holds up pretty good. Dimensional worlds, when you're looking at an octave of existence, is that there are 13 major dimensions in an octave, actually 12 because the 13th is the first in the next octave, but it's even more than that because if you look between any note, what you're going to see is overtones. Now, I've heard there's more than a couple hundred overtones between each note, but in fact there are 12 harmonic overtones in between each note, and the same is true for dimensional worlds. What we're talking about then is the fact that there's 144 different worlds in each octave of existence. And
that's
so
12 times 12.
That's exactly right. So there's our world, and our world is known as the third dimension, but there's 143 others, and they're occupying exactly the same space. The reason we're not aware of them is that they are separated by wavelength in exactly the same way that notes are separated on a musical scale.
How do we know that?
Well, that's something that according to the Ascended Masters, that's something that, along with many things, we've forgotten that we know. What they're saying is that in our 200,000-year history, up until 13,000 years ago when Atlantis sank, we used to be on a much higher level of awareness than we are right now. What they're saying is that we resided on either the 10th or 11th or 12th overtone of the fourth dimension, where our perception of the one reality was completely different from what we see and what we perceive right now. But that something happened in Atlantis about 16,000 years ago that caused us to misuse our power in about the greatest way possible. Directly, that led to the fall of Atlantis, the sinking of Atlantis, and put us in a very high-dimensional level of awareness right down here to what they're calling the bottom of the barrel of self-aware consciousness, third dimension.
Did Atlantis was before the civilizations of Egypt?
Yes, much before.
But there is indication that the civilizations of Egypt had abilities and skills that we don't have today. So if this great fall happened with Atlantis, why would the Egyptians have been able to use powers that we can't today?
Because there were survivors from Atlantis. Essentially, we're talking about the Ascended Masters again. Before, when the poles shifted and when Atlantis fell, a group of ascended masters had actually constructed an underground city designed to hold about 10,000 people underneath the Great Pyramid. And so they waited from about 13,000 years ago, they waited about 6,000 or 7,000 years until we dried out enough, so to speak, so that they felt that we were ready to begin reseeding us with the lost knowledge. And what they did at that time is that they would come out in groups of 2 or 3, dressed exactly like the Egyptians, and literally would just walk up and just begin giving back the hidden information. Now, some evidence to back that up, Barbara, is that it's not understood how it happened in both Samaria and in Egypt, where these civilizations came out in their full form just from nowhere. Mm-hmm. Just in one day, here they were in their full and complete form, and from there they started going downhill again. Well, what the Ascended Masters are saying is that the reason it happened, and by the way, it's called stair-step evolution, where all of a sudden a great amount of information is known, it levels out, and then a great amount of new information is known, and the culture just takes off again. Mm-hmm. What they're saying is that was a result of their direct intervention.
Whose direct intervention?
Ascended Masters.
Oh. Could that be where we are today with this huge amount of technology that we've had over the last 60, 70 years?
Many people think that there's an ET influence on the technology level.
Was there an ET influence back in the days of Atlantis, or was this all earthbound?
No, there's been an ET influence on this planet forever. This planet has a 500 million year history. However, we only have access to the past 5.5 million years because something happened in the Akashic records. Something happened that we can't go beyond 5.5 million years. This planet has always been a starseed where ET races from who knows where have come here, created new races, left, and left usually without a trace.
How do we know all this?
Well, again, this is something that is obviously not common knowledge. I haven't heard about it too much on the 6 o'clock news lately.
That's true. They don't even talk about UFOs on the 6 o'clock.
Yeah, right. Only as a joke if they do at all.
That's true.
So obviously, this is not information that is mainstream common knowledge. And again, you're asking, how do we know all of these things? Number one, I have to continue to go back to my disclaimer that I'm not, as I said in my book, nothing in this book is true. And I really prefer in many ways that people just listen to this as a science fiction story, because there is something else going on. A point that I continually make in my workshops is that things are not as they appear to be. And so that's true with respect to what we're talking about, for sure. So I've often thought that, if we can just sit back and like a Star Trek episode, mm-hmm. and take it in that way, it might be more useful. So I'm not trying to prove anything. And the second point is that the information is coming from the highest aspect of us. There's about 7,000 or 8,000 of us in our 200,000-year history who have learned what you might call the secrets of advanced living. And fundamentally what that includes is that they've figured out that it's possible to keep your body and to keep your consciousness without a break in memory for much longer than what we've considered to be a normal lifespan. They've learned how either to go through resurrection or through ascension, keeping their memory intact as they ascend through the heights. And some of them have allegedly kept their memories in place for a couple 100,000 years.
Do they live that long?
Yeah, people do.
Are you one of them?
Well, so are you in a sense that.
No, you answer my question. Are you one of them?
It depends on how you look at it. From the perspective of the fact that you and I are intimately connected to the whole. Everyone and everything is part of the one spirit moving through all life everywhere. And spirit always is, always has been, and always will be. That means you and I have been around the block many, many times.
You mean reincarnation?
Reincarnation is only one aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean is that as an aspect of the one spirit, we've been around forever. We've been around since the beginning. We'll be around until the end. And we've obviously taken many different forms. But the real key here is that we don't have the memory of having been around prior to this lifetime.
That's
when
right.
we're talking the level of ascended master, we're talking about individuals who have not had a break in memory for thousands of years. Big difference.
Does this preclude the existence of God?
No, this absolutely includes the existence of God. That the point essential to this understanding is that there's one spirit. Everyone and everything is intimately connected to the whole. Everyone is the whole in the same way that even though we have trillions of cells in our bodies, it's just us, and they're all working together. The cells in the body are all working together in contribution to the greatest good of the whole.
But if there's a God, in the sense that he's the all-powerful, all-knowing, you know, that kind of thing, and the creator, if you see God as the creator, if what you're saying is true, then he simply created everything, and it's just been kind of evolving on its own ever since. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I think the essential point, Barbara, is that there is one spirit, call it God, call it spirit, call it whatever you want, one spirit moving through all life everywhere. Everyone and everything is intimately connected to that whole. We've tended to see for the last 13,000 years ourselves separate and cut off from that whole, looking out at a world that is not us, but nothing could be further from the truth. It's not our experience. But again, that's a direct result of having fallen from a high level of awareness 13,000 years ago down to the bottom of the barrel of self-aware consciousness, where it's our perception that that's true.
Does this mean that we were all alive then, or am I a different person than people who lived before me?
You're a different person in,
I'm not even sure I'm asking the question correctly.
Yeah. Well, I know. How do you ask the question correctly? It's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
So does that mean that everybody who was ever alive, ever, is still alive? That's what I think you're saying, but I'm not certain.
As eternal spirit, that is true. Yeah.
So once you are created, whenever that might have been, then you exist forever.
Put it this way, there's no such thing as death. There's simply movement from one level of awareness to another. That death is an illusion that to many of us might seem like, you know, this is all there is. This lifetime is it. And when we die, that's it. But the larger reality is that when we die, we're simply changing form. The spirit in us lives forever, always has been, always will be.
Where does it go?
Good question. My understanding of what we've been doing for the past 13,000 years in reincarnation is that when we die here, we go to the lower overtones of the fourth dimension, about the third overtone, I believe, and then we come back through reincarnation at the appropriate time. But the interesting thing is that when we're there, we don't have the memory of having been here, and when we're here, we don't have the memory of having been there, and when we're here, we don't have the memory of our past lifetimes for the most part. What we're talking about when we make the distinction between us and Ascended Master is that the real key is not living in a body forever. The key is maintaining your memory, never again having a break in memory.
But now you said, when we first started talking, that one of the things that's happening now is that we can't remember things. So what does that mean?
It means that for most of us, it seems that our short-term memory is not quite what it used to be. And that's tied to a larger fact, and that is that the magnetic field of the Earth has been fluctuating greatly. For the last couple thousand years, it actually began. For 500 years, it's been fluctuating significantly, and for the last few years, it's just been going off the scale. What does that mean? What it means is that our emotional stability and our short-term memory is tied directly to the stability of the magnetic field. When the magnetic field goes to zero, that's when the poles shift, and that's when the dimensions shift. And what the Ascended Masters are saying is that we are a planet that is very much in the process of moving from the third dimension back into the higher overtones of the fourth dimension. In other words, going back to where we were before we fell down 13,000 years ago.
So between the third and the fourth dimension, there's this huge gap in our abilities and knowledge, etc.
Well,
that's a huge jump, if that's what you're saying.
Huge jump.
Yeah.
To help further clarify the issue, Barbara, we need to look at the different levels of consciousness. There's 3 particular levels of consciousness associated not only with planet Earth, but probably at least through the entire solar system. And who knows, it could be all-inclusive. But the 3 different levels of consciousness I think we need to put on the table here to perhaps further our understanding. There's the first level, and that's where we were when we came in 200,000 years ago, all the way up through to the fall of Atlantis. There's the second level where we are now, and there's the third level that we're in the process of moving into. So each has a height range, each has a number of chromosomes, and each has a different way of accessing memory. The first level of consciousness, when we came in, has a height range of about 4 to 5 feet. And so that means that we were short up until 13,000 years ago. It also has 2 fewer chromosomes, 42 plus 2, not the 44 plus 2 that we have. And perhaps the most significant aspect of it is that they have a completely different way of accessing memory. And in fact, there is a living example of that first level of consciousness on the planet today, and that's the Aborigines from Australia. They have this thing called dream time. And dream time, to my understanding, is that if you're talking to one Aborigine, whatever you've said, in fact, you are making available to the entire body of the Aborigine through dream time. And what it means then is that they can go back and they can holographically recreate your conversation, the room you were sitting in, everything in it, walk around the room, pick up objects and take a look at them, and in absolute detail recreate the conversation, everything else that happened throughout the course of that discussion. That can happen at some point in the future. So if you compare that to the way we, on the second level, access memory, if you're anything like me, if you can tell me 10% of what you were doing 1 week ago tonight, you're doing pretty good.
I'm curious about how you know that we were 4 to 5 feet high those years ago, and how you know that we have a different number of chromosomes. Those kinds of things are terribly specific about something that took place such a long time ago, and in fact what the difference in the chromosomes would mean, because isn't that sort of the difference between normal and abnormal, or the difference between us and other species? We're talking with Bob. He's the author of Something in This Book is True. It's the official companion to his other book, Nothing in This Book is True, but it's exactly how things are. He also has written You Are a Spiritual Being Having a Human Experience. He's a teacher of 2 workshops. He also has a video called Nothing to Something. Keep a paper and pencil handy, and I'll give you his website and a phone number if you'd like to find out more about his writings. He's talking to us about the dire predictions of prophecy, and it appears that we are in the midst of changes. Question is, what are those changes and what do they mean? But he also tells us that we actually create reality, that everything is a function of our consciousness. Well, if that's true, then what happens to us, to our world, our Earth, would be in our control. And if that's true, my question is, what are we going to do about it? We'll find out. It's dream time of the Aborigines and their ability to recreate consciousness. Why is it that they can do it and we can't?
Mm-hmm.
What's different about their minds or their ability, or maybe it's just their approach to living? I'm not certain.
Good question. Well, my answer is because they're on a completely different level of consciousness. They are a living and remaining example of the consciousness that we once were, as recent as 13,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That being the first level of consciousness. We're what we're going to call the second level of consciousness. Obviously, our height range is 5 to 7 feet. We have 44 plus 2 chromosomes, and we don't have the dreamtime way of accessing memory, obviously. Reading and writing is something that was really introduced only as our culture came out in ancient Egypt about a little less than 6,000 years ago. So what it did was it dropped us out of dreamtime, and we have to access memory in a way that we do now. We can.
Do the Aborigines have different chromosomes than we do?
Yes, they do. 42 plus 2. We've got 44 plus 2.
How does science today explain that?
Well, I don't know if science has an explanation for it. None that I've heard anyway. So again,
I must admit that's the first time I ever heard that different human beings on this planet today have different chromosomes.
Yeah, and it gets better than that because the level we're moving into has 46 plus 2, in addition to the height range being 10 to 16 feet. And in addition to that, the memory is upgraded in that it's not dream time, rather it's real time. Because on the third level of consciousness, whatever you think is instantly manifested. That is the reality. That means if you think orange, you've got an orange. You can peel it, you can eat it.
You mentioned about the height. We know that people who lived in colonial days or back during the French Revolution were short. I mean, if you just even look at houses, if you've ever gone to Boston and you go into some of the Revolutionary War homes, the doorways were very short. We know that Napoleon was short, and people in his day were much shorter than we are today. Generally speaking, that's explained by diet and vitamins and things, and yet you have tribes in Africa, for example, the Watusi, are very tall. How are those differences explained?
Well, don't know how those differences are explained, Barbara, but for me, we're all examples of the second level of consciousness, whether you're talking about now or colonial times or Africa or wherever or whenever, and we have been the second level of consciousness ever since our culture came out about 6,000 years ago. To me, the larger question is why? Why did we move from the first into the second, and why are we about to move into the third?
Good question. Why?
Yeah, good.
Do we know?
Well, the Ascended Masters know, and what they're saying then is that if you go back about 16,000 years when we were in full swing in Atlantis, there's something we did that was against galactic law. We misused power in about the greatest way possible, and that caused 3,000 years later, when the poles shifted and the dimensions shifted, it caused us to fall from a very high level down to a very low level. Now, the problem is much, much bigger than that. So big, in fact, that it almost killed the planet. It was beyond the level even of the Ascended Masters to completely solve the problem, so they asked for and they received outside intervention. Basically, they were able to heal about 90% of the problem, but not 100%. So there is, for example, still at this day, an out-of-control energy field in the area that we know as the Bermuda Triangle. This is where this experiment was conducted 16,000 years ago, and it is a problem that is not only affecting us on planet Earth. Perhaps you've heard of ships and planes mysteriously disappearing in the Bermuda Triangle.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, evidently what happens is that if a plane or a ship happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time in that area, they literally are sucked into a different dimensional level because of these out-of-control forces.
Is the experiments, and I know you've written about the Philadelphia experiment, does that kind of experimentation flirt with danger as far as human beings are concerned?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. When we're talking about the Philadelphia experiment, we're talking essentially about the same sort of experiment that was tried 16,000 years ago in Atlantis and went totally out of control. In fact, the Philadelphia experiment, beyond the surface level of trying to make a battleship invisible, if you accept that in the first place. But beyond that, what it really was about was trying to couple up with the out-of-control field in the Bermuda Triangle and trying to solve the problem. It was not successful. It only, in fact, made it worse.
In the days back, in the days of Atlantis, back then, what were they trying to do?
Okay, we have to go back, Barbara, about 65,000 years ago when Lemuria sank, but it sank in a way that was not a problem because at that time we were a very intuitive, very right-brain culture, and in other words, we were very much in tune with what was going on. Lemuria was slowly sinking for thousands and thousands of years. About 1,000 years before Lemuria sank, there was a couple known as Ai and Taiye who discovered the process of immortality. And basically, they discovered that you can keep your body beyond the normal lifespan.